Did you know that Israel was funded by terrorists? Let's look at a letter first. In 1948, Einstein wrote a letter to Rifkin. The letter says, "When a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it, the terrorist organizations built up from our own ranks. I'm not willing to see anybody associated with those misled and criminal people." What? Jewish terrorist organizations? Yes, they really exist and continue to exist today. Listen carefully. Let me explain. Irgun, Sterngan, also Lehi, and Haganah. They were led by the former Israeli PM Begin and Shamir and the Israeli founding father David Ben-Gurion. Let's review the historical background. What was the Irgun? What was the purpose of this organization? Does it still exist today? Was Israel created by use of terrorism and terrorists? To answer this question, we must first go back and find out what exactly went wrong there in Palestine. Most people have this notion, particularly those in West. Jews and Arabs have been at each other's neck for hundreds if not thousands of years. But this is not true. In fact, this is farthest thing from the truth. For the last 1,500 years, Jews and Arabs have lived among each other in peace. Sure, they had run-ins, but Jews have lived in predominantly Islamic nation throughout the last millennium. With the freedom to practice Judaism, they achieved great advancement in mathematics, chemistry, and astronomy. They fought alongside each other in wars, for example, against Spain in 8th century, and shared common problems during Inquisition against the Byzantine, and they shared heritage as they are both Semites. For those that believe Ashkenazis are even Semites. But where did it go wrong? You say in 1878, Palestine had a population about 500,000, with Arabs being 96.8% of that population, and the few Jews living there living in complete peace with Arabs. But 10 years later, the problem didn't exactly arise, but the root of them did. Jewish organizations, including Rothschilds, began to buy in pieces of land in Palestine, and by 1897, Zionism was born, led by Chaim Weizmann and the founder Theodor Herzl. And the goal is to establish the Greater Israel. Zionism began to grow and develop. This directly contributed to the wave of Jews returning to the Promised Land. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration was issued. Brits promised the Jews a homeland in Palestine. After the Allied victory in World War I, British mandate for Palestine begins. After the British mandate was officially implemented, around 1919 to 1920, a new form of Zionism was born, which formed the ideology that's the basis for right-wing politics in Israel today, especially the Likud party. This form of revision is Zionist holds the belief that Jewish men and women are owned and deserve the complete sovereignty of Greater Israel. From the Brook of Egypt to Euphrates is given by God. This form of Zionism created a movement called Batar, funded by Zev Jabotinsky, in order to indoctrinate ambitious Jewish youth to fight the enemies of Judaism, and hopes of one day secure the Promised Land. Jabotinsky founded the Jewish paramilitary organization, known today as Haganah, and a few members and commanders of Haganah got together and created a new underground militia, now known as Irgun, meaning National Military Organization, and put Tiomi as the leader. Their symbol is a rifle and a map of Greater Israel, meaning only by the gun will they achieve their goals. Later, the Haganah and the Irgun began to join forces, and they began to smuggle Jewish immigrants to the beaches of Palestine in order to disperse them into different Jewish settlements. All the while, he was calling for his evacuation plan, which called for millions of European Jews to illegal immigrants to Palestine. And in 1937, they gradually began their terrorist activities. In 1937 alone, they carried out more than 10 terrorist attacks, and Irgun became a completely different entity. And an article in the underground newspaper of Irgun, By the Sword, they created a new word called active defense, said they must play defense by the way of offense, in order to deprive the enemy the option of attacking. and called this active defense. Between the year 1937 and 1939 during the revolt, the Irgun killed countless Palestinians and British by targeting and blowing up buses, cinemas, and marketplaces. But people need to understand that Irgun hated the British just as much. In fact, their terror campaign against the British seems to be more ruthless. It's all because they want them out of Palestine, and just like they want Arabs out. The British mandated Palestine after World War I, and letting the Jews slowly and legally migrate here wasn't enough because they want the land now. So it didn't matter British rule to the Jews. In their eyes, that was their land, and they were the enemies.
I really couldn't understand it. You know, I thought we'd behaved pretty decently throughout the war, and just couldn't make out why they hated us so much. You know, we weren't the Germans. We hadn't incarcerated them in, you know, death camps.
So we didn't have anything to do with the Jews. We didn't really have anything to do with the Arabs either, but at least the Arabs didn't murder us, or didn't try and murder us. They just tried to steal everything from us.
And it was around this time, during the early terror campaign, maybe 1938 or 1939, that Irgun began to set up underground sleeper cells all throughout Europe and organize ways in order to inform Jews about making the move towards Palestine. The purpose of the cells were also to train and teach guerrilla warfare, so they're prepared when they migrated to Palestine. Abraham Stern, who was one of the Irgun commanders that led the group during the second split-up, formed his own militia later in 1940, with another former Irgun member named Yitzhak Shamir, and they called the group Lehi. The British officers referred to often as the Stern Gang, and they were just as ruthless as the Irgun.
The British were most outraged by a second, even smaller guerrilla outfit, the Stern Gang or group, which regularly concentrated on killing British soldiers. In one notorious incident, British paratroopers were surprised while camped in a car park in Tel Aviv.
The fact that these soldiers were murdered in cold blood without having to be able to defend themselves in any way at all was a complete surprise.
This group literally referred to their own members as terrorists, and much like the Irgun, their goal was Greater Israel and expel all other races. In fact, the Stern Gang operate very similar to Nazis, as they claim themselves as master race and actually want to collaborate with Nazis to free the Jews. This is an article from the Lehi Underground newspaper. You can pause here. This is Menachem Begin, a Russian-born Jew and rabbi, who led the Betar movement in Poland during the Irgun, and almost immediately took the role as its leader in 1943. And under the order of Begin in 1944, Irgun set up posters all around Palestine, asking for recruits and declaring for a revolt against the British, ultimately calling for war. Throughout the 1940s, the Irgun and Stern Gang carried out countless terrorist attacks against Arabs and the British. They used bomb attacks and massacred civilians, kidnapping British soldiers and assassinating British officers, looting the armory, even used human bombs and human shields, and becoming more and more organized under the leadership of Begin. And most infamous of these operations would soon come. The British authority decided to ignore the inquiries of the AAC, which recommended allowing 100,000 more Jews in Palestine. And instead they ran Operation Agatha, also known as Black Saturday or Black Sabbath, which was a huge raid done by the Brits in order to search for arms and other illegal material, and resulting in arrest over 2,000 Jews. It was at this point in which the British authority had enough evidence and legal documents in order to classify Jews as a danger to Palestine, and they collected verifiable proof to label this group as terrorist networks, and they add evidence linking the David Ben-Gurion to these networks. On July 22, 1946, Irgun carried out the deadliest and the most infamous atrocity yet. Under Menachem Begin, this organization blew up the southwestern corner of King David Hotel, a British headquarters that housed the military command branch of the Criminal Investigation Division, where many of the documents were held regarding their crime and their activities committed by deadly Jewish organizations. And they accomplished this by dressing as Arabs and stuffing bombs in the basement of the building, disguised as milk crates. 91 people lost their lives, 78 civilians and workers, and 13 British officers. In the following years, Jewish terrorist organizations became more and more crazy. They carried out indiscriminate and unscrupulous terrorist attacks. They even bombed the British embassy in Rome. It was to monitor and stop illegal Jewish immigrants. And they even hanged British officers and hide bombs in their bodies.
This is pretty grim. This is barbaric, in my view. The force thought so, I think the army thought so, the press thought so.
After so many events happened, the British finally realized whether they should consider leaving Palestine, and whether it was worth risking more of their own. But August 1947 was the perfect time for the second thoughts, since the UN began their deliberation on the fate of Palestine and the Jewish homeland. And while the final talks were going on with the UN Special Committee of Palestine, Uruguay avoided any attacks. They didn't want any negative events to influence the outcome of the talks. On September 3rd, UNSCP agreed for the termination of the mandate. And the very same day, both Uruguay and Sturningen continued their attacks on British targets. But the UN were not cried down. The most important talks were yet to come, and Zionists knew it. The UN had to find a solution for Palestine, since the British mandate was about to end. So on November 1947, the UN partition plan for Palestine was complete. After fairly quick deliberations, the UN Assembly adopted Resolution 181, which recognized a two-state solution. But the main issue is too many benefits for Jews, and they were granted a majority of fertile land. This of course made no sense to Palestinians and Arabs. This was their homeland, and Arabs made up 2/3 of the population. They quickly grew furious, causing civil unrest. At this moment, Begin and his Uruguay immediately began to take action and started building military bases and recruiting more and more soldiers. Uruguay, Sturningen, and Haganah fought alongside each other against the Arabs. For example, on January 7, 1948, they built a bomb and threw it into a crowd of civilians that were just waiting for a bus at the Jaffa gate, killing 16, and 2 days before that, they detonated a Larry bomb, killing 14. And though the mandate was terminated, the British didn't pack up and leave all at once. They slowly and systematically began to pull out, trying to achieve and keep whatever stability was left. The last group of British soldiers did not leave until May. Unfortunately for the British soldiers that were still there during the conflict, they are treated and targeted as enemy. And now it came from both ends, since Palestinian Arabs felt betrayed. But there was a few firefight exchanges between the Arabs and the Europeans. As usual, there was no record of Arabs cowardly bombing or terrorizing the British. Nevertheless, on April 6, 1948, Uruguay raided a British army camp at Paradis Hana, confiscating almost all the artillery, killing 6 soldiers and executing their commanding officer. 3 days later, on April 1948, a complete atrocity was to take place. It seemed that there was no way these terrorists can get any more sinister than previously achieved, and the Uruguay and the Sturningen had an all-time low. And it was called the Del Yassin Massacre, where the guerrilla warfare of 120 Uruguay and Sturningen members ensured and ravaged an Arab village called Del Yassin, killing between 150 to 200 Arabs in cold blood, which included blowing up their homes. Unarmed entire families were slaughtered, including women and children.
أولادي وأخويا موسى بكاليت أنا معدة في موسى مشاكل نتونس بالله في هذا البيت. أجي قال لي لما كنا بالبيت كنا في مش كسر خبطنا الكنبلة وجينا 6 صوت أنا وبنت الصواب تمسح أولادي وكان بعد ما راحت المراكز الحالة كسروا باب عليهم وطلعونا بدي ما كنت لأخوي مسادبة في على وجهها ما كنت له تناولت 250 ليرة من عدة وقلت يا خواجة بس مشان الله الطالب اللي كنت لسه لأن كتير أنت كويس هات المصاري بارس في كوتش الحنو شو تسويش فيها كوتش الحنو أجل هات ويلي على السلام يحمي أظلت نعود حتى في السير ويكون سكين سكدة حتى 5 من التحرسها.
The Irgun would go on to fight more Arabs and capture more villages for the rest of the conflict, which included Irgun's largest operation ever. On April, with the help of Haganah and others, they captured the city of Jaffa. The city began with 60,000 Arabs, but by the end of the siege, the number shrank to 4,100, with most of them either being massacred or fleeing the city. By May 14, 1948, after conquering pretty much all of Palestine, the Zionists proclaimed its independence as a sovereign state of Israel, with David Ben-Gurion as their leader. But 7 surrounding Arab nations were sick to watch and unfold, immediately declared war on Israel for what is now known as the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The Haganah organization, however, joined the newly developed Israeli Defense Force (IDF), and on June 1st, Menachem Begin agreed with the IDF absorbed the Irgun. So does the Irgun still exist today? To answer this, let's refresh our memories and simply connect the dots. It starts with the birth of a revision of Zionism, which is simply an ideology, nothing more, nothing less. It's the belief need to understand. One day Jews will have a homeland. From the Brook of Egypt to the Euphrates, an entire region of land given in promise by God, also known as the Greater Israel. And in order to achieve this territory, they must use a military force. Even terrorism, since Zionists have used terrorism as a political tool. And the idea is strongly opposed of the Arab regions, while many, especially Zionists themselves, would argue that Zionism is nothing but a movement for Jewish homeland, plain and simple. Then they don't know their own history. They use the boundaries revealed in Genesis 15, chapter 18, verse 21, as their Eretz Israel. So anyhow, this is revisionist Zionism. That was the basis of the Irgun ideology. Connecting to next thought is simple. The leader of the Irgun is Menachem Begin, who is made to integrate the Irgun with the IDF. And the same year in 1948, Begin created Haru, a political party of the State of Israel. Obviously, the same ideology of the Irgun followed into this new political party. You don't just go for one day, have such a strong belief that you are leading a group of men to blow up people that have a different goal, perspective, and viewpoint. Hence, the Irgun member joined Haru, and Itzhak Shamir, a former commander of the Stern Gang, became his party leader along with Menachem Begin. It was one of the largest right-wing parties in Israel. Politically, Haru wasn't achieving much success in Knesset, probably because of its outlandish views. So in order to gain traction, Begin created the Likud party. And of course, the ideology of the party was same as the Haru, hence the same as the Irgun. 4 years later, the Likud did only succeed. The leader of the party, Mr. Begin himself, became the 6th Prime Minister of Israel. In fact, the Likud party has been in power in the past few decades, even to following his footsteps, as the 7th PM was the former Stern Gang commander, Itzhak Shamir. Irgun still alive, calling itself a political party. And it's been calling the shots in Israel, with Benjamin Netanyahu, also known as Bibi, as its leader, and its longest-serving prime minister yet. The son of Benjamin Netanyahu, a revisionist fanatic, both a student and secretary of Jabotinsky, a co-editor of the Betar newspaper, a man that called the UN decision disgrace. He believed the Jews were robbed and deserved all the mandate. A man that has his hands in American politics. And you all know what happened later. After taking over the US, they are one step closer to the Greater Israel. At that time, they need to whitewash themselves and divert the conflicts. They use politics, culture, economy, and other means to influence the world. Haven't you realized it after all that has happened? Of course, they haven't forgotten their roots, terrorism. So why the hell, after thousands of years peaceful coexistence between Arab and Jews, when Zionists appeared, Arab terrorists followed? They invade other religions, carrying out terrorist attacks in the name of them. And this affects the whole world.
Well, I was getting this question in the 1990s, and I said that the West really doesn't understand militant Islam. So I wrote a book in 1995. In 1995, I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center.
Americans, you're about to be pulled into a war with Arabs, with the Muslim world, and you're going to be made to believe that something horrible that happened to you was done by the Muslims. But it wasn't done by the Muslims. It was done by a wild card, the Israeli Mossad, that's cunning and ruthless and can carry out attacks on Americans and make it look like Arabs did it. That's not my conspiracy theory. That's a U.S. Army report.
And they have affected too many countries through this. I won't go deep because if you know, you know. The most terrifying thing is that they succeeded through propaganda and cultural output. And don't forget that the United States is the largest exporter of culture. Now the whole world thinks Arabs are the terrorists, including you in front of the screen, right? You were fooled. Everyone was fooled. And they succeeded. Now the truth has been revealed. This didn't come out of vacuum. Everything is connected. Are you still pretending nothing happened? Wake the fuck up.